Good afternoon to you all. I welcome you here to discuss and to reflect on the 30 years of full diplomatic relations between Greece and Israel, actually, and 70 years of not full, of de facto only diplomatic relations, and only 10 actually of deeper relations between our two countries. I want to welcome you all. I want to welcome the Ambassador of Israel to Greece, Mr. Yossi Amrani. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for being with us here, although we know that it's a hectic time for you because of what is happening in Israel between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government. I want to welcome Alexandros Dιακόπουλος, the National Security Advisor to the Greek Prime Minister, to Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Good afternoon, Mr. Dιακόπουλος. I want to welcome also Ευάγγελος Καλπαδάκης. He's a diplomatic advisor to the leader of the major opposition, to our former Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras. Good afternoon, Mr. Kalpadakis. And to Professor of Political Studies of Bar-Ilan University, Mr. Amrani. Professor Amrani, I welcome you also from Israel here to us in Athens. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Mr. Ambassador, I want to ask with a question: what changed actually in the last 10 years, and Israel and Greece came closer together? We know that exactly this day, 30 years ago, we had the de jure recognition of Israel. But it took Israel and Greece many years, almost 20 years, so that we could have deeper relations. Why do you think that is?
Well, thank you very much, Οντίν, for having this event. It's a great opportunity on this very important day in the relationship between our two countries, Israel and Greece, that we are having this seminar, this brainstorming after exchange of messages of the two presidents, the two speakers of parliament, and a very warm and constructive video conference between the two prime ministers almost 2 hours ago. As for your question, I would not limit the change or the development to the last 10 years. I would even say, borrowing from high-tech terminology, that the relationship are under construction, and the construction is ongoing. It is developing in these very days as we are preparing for the next stage of upgrading the relationship. There was an important breakthrough during the Syriza time in power. At this time, I think everyone realized that the friendship and the strategic cooperation between the two countries on both sides of the Mediterranean, in Israel and here in Greece, are, if I'm borrowing American terms, are bipartisan. And altogether, we have seen in the last 20 years, I would say, a certain effort to overcome the past, stereotypes and realpolitik of previous times. This is a different era. We may go into details and explanations, and Professor Nachmani, whom I'm very pleased to meet over this webinar, can go more into depth into the background of the relationship. It took us a while to accept geostrategy. If I'm using very general terms, it took us a long time to understand that cooperation is a win-win for both countries, and maybe I would dare a win-win for the region. And the relationship should not be limited to one dimension. That would be a mistake. The relationship should encompass as many aspects of cooperation, and if I can preempt or precede the statement of the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem following the conference, a video conference between the two prime ministers, they have discussed during their conversation the scope of cooperation in different fields. We are Mediterranean countries. We share the region. Nature hazards, it's a concern for all of us. We are recovering, hopefully, from the coronavirus. Cooperation during that time between health authorities and health experts was immense. So the cooperation is not limited to one aspect. The cooperation is for the common good, and the cooperation has a certain regional aspect. Some people think, and I would challenge them, that the relationship are limited to only military relationship. This may have started, this This was true in the early 2000s, where we started the relationship or the enhancement of the relationship, but the scope of the relationship and the strategic dimension of the relationship is much richer. Since we are neighboring countries, since we are in the same territorial capsule, using Corona terminology these days, there is so much to cooperate and exchange between the two countries. Greece has historically a very good relationship with the Arab world. Israel's position in the Israel's position in world affairs has changed immensely in the last 10 to 11 years. I would even put the mark on 2009, the Obama speech in Cairo, and the certain changes in the Arab world. Israel has developed or has become a certain strategic anchor for many countries in the region. And I would say that together, Israel and Greece, through strategic cooperation, may be anchors of stability, of prosperity. This is nothing to do with excluding one country. No one should even think that this relationship is aimed at one country. It's wrong. It's aimed at stabilizing our countries and establishing a role, if I borrow from somewhere else, under the sun, for Israel in Europe, for Greece in the Middle East, for Greece to be a leverage for Israel, reach out to the region where we belong geographically. So there is a strategic dimension to the relationship, and there is a strategic dimension which we need to work on. But this is not enough. We have very strong people-to-people relations. I'm ambassador to this country for the last 8 months, and I would like to share with you the feeling I meet, not only with officials and not only with elected people and not only with the journalists and the intellectuals, but on the street. There is a acceptance, a real welcome to Israel and to cooperation with Israel. This has changed. Greece has been present in Israel long before the warming up of the relationship, through music, through tourism, through food. Now you see the same in Greece. The average people on the street believe in the relationship between the two countries. We need to build on this goodwill, which starts from bottom up and from top bottom, because the leadership of the country, and this is a change of the last few years, realized that Greece is better off through cooperation with Israel in many fronts. We need to invest in academic cooperation, scientific cooperation with a very clear economic vision. The role we can play in supporting each other economically, scientifically. We need to connect our countries. There is an important initiative which was promoted by the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, now the Finance Minister, Tracks for Regional Peace, the idea of connecting the ports of Haifa to Piraeus. There is a strategic overview for the relationship where we need to invest. So the relationship has developed immensely over the last 20 years. We have not yet reached the limit. The sky may be the limit. Maybe the sky is beyond that limit. I don't know. But we are working now on enhancing the relationship, on developing vehicles of substantial cooperation between the two countries. And this is a great opportunity to discuss the relationship and to look or brainstorm together how we can build the relationship for the future. Me personally, knowing the history, reading the writings of Professor Nachmani about the history of the relationship, history is important. I'm a student of history, but I'd like to take the relationship, at least I would like to contribute in taking the relationship a step further into the future. And the future is regional strategic cooperation, where the regions of interest to Israel would be Europe, and you are a pillar of European unity and EU policies, and in the region where we belong, the Middle East. So thank you very much for initiating this conference, for inviting me to open it, and I look forward to participate.
Now we want to ask Mr. Dιακόπουλος. We had here in Greece, we thought that we began to deepen our relationship with Israel because Israel had a problem with Turkey. We remember all what happened in 2010, and in the Greek people's mind, that was something that projected in our getting closer with Israel. What do you believe, Mr. Dιακόπουλος? Is a relationship that has to do with that, or is the time had come. The time was right for us to get closer with Israel for all the reasons that the ambassador just told us.
Yes, thank you very much, Οντίν. If you allow me, I will start with a personal story, and I will answer your question just afterwards. So I'm continuing from what the ambassador, His Excellency, said. To say this, I was policy director in the Ministry of Defense. During the elections, it was almost Christmas 2014. Syriza was coming, everybody knew it. So I had a visit at the time of the defense attaché from the Embassy of Israel. It was Yuval Gerbi. Now he works in the National Security Council. But at the time he was the defense attaché. So he came to my office. He couldn't find anybody. I was the only one available at the time because of the elections. And he asked me, okay, who is going to win the elections? I said, Syriza, of course. And he asked then, so what's going to happen in our relation? They were very worried at the time because of the policy of Syriza when it was in the opposition and some comments made here and there. And I told him what I strongly believed, that our relation is not opportunistic. Greece doesn't do that. Neither transactional. It's not the way Greece works. Our relation has strategic depth, and the ambassador talked about the strategic depth, has sound geopolitical sense, and this relation is going to continue and even deepen, as it happened in the end. So that shows how deep is our relation, and I say all that because the ambassador made that reference. And we're talking about the official relations of states, and we had the professor here who knows the antiquity well. Okay, the relation between people is thousands of years ago. It goes back to antiquity. Even in the sacred island of Delos, you can find vestiges of a synagogue, and you can find vestiges of synagogues in many places in Greece. And you can find many Greek monuments, or even the Patriarchate of Jerusalem in Israel. So the relation is strong, and it's a long-time relation. Now the official relation. This relation which started in 91, incidentally, Prime Minister was the father of today's Prime Minister, was Konstantinos Mitsotakis. I believe it was one of 2 or 3 best things that happened in the in the foreign policy of Greece. And by having this relation, which it's true, took another dimension after the 2000, to have this, we somehow fulfilled the vision of the visionary of Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion was the first who have seen the geopolitical sense. Israel was essentially a Western society, politically and culturally, I mean, in the Middle East, the closest Western country, the closest European Union country, geographically, politically, historically, was Greece. So it's only natural that Israel was linked to the European Union and to the West through Greece and Cyprus. So that made perfect sense, as I said. Now you refer to Turkey. As I have said many times to my Israeli friends and interlocutors, our relation has a value as it is, per se. It doesn't have to do anything with any third country. Our relation will continue even when Israel will normalize its relations with Turkey, because at some point, 1 year and 5 years and 10 years, they will normalize their relations. For countries, it pays off cooperation much more than confrontation. So I believe that at some point they would, but our relation is deep and strategic, it's getting traction, it's becoming stronger and stronger, and it will continue. Now, I just will add just a small thought that, of course, what happened between Israel and Turkey, let's be honest, facilitated a little bit. It was a little bit a catalyst to wake people up and say, come on, we have to do something more. So at the time, yes, it gave us a boost to our relation, which started in the military domain, as the ambassador said. But it was not a problem of personal relations between the president of Turkey, then prime minister, or prime minister of Israel. Again, what happened between Israel and Turkey, to my opinion, had some geopolitical and strategic dimension as well. Israel is a strong and powerful country in the area. Turkey, as it became stronger and more powerful, wanted to dominate the area, to become the regional hegemon and the regional power. And this, as long as Turkey continued this kind of strategy and policy, inevitably, I mean, you couldn't avoid this, they would clash. And this is what I believe happened. But to answer your question, to finish my intervention, no, our relation has a value as it is and has nothing to do, and it's not defined by any third country, whether it's Turkey or anybody else. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dιακόπουλος, we will excuse you for 5-10 minutes, however you need to make your phone calls, and then we expect you back here in our discussion.
I promise I'll be back. Thank you very much.
Okay. And I want to go to Mr. Kalpadackis. Mr. Kalpadackis, at the time when Syriza was in the government, it is true that you strengthened the relationship between Israel and Greece. And it is also true that because you were a left-wing government, it wasn't something that in Greece we expected from you. And so I want for you to explain to me how that happened, and if you really believe that the relationship between Israel and Greece can get even better, and in the defense, in defense, in tourism, in energy, in every aspect in the area.
Thank you very much. Well, just to underline what was said also by the ambassador and by Admiral Dιακόπουλος, it is true that the bipartisan character of support for Greek-Israeli relations became only stronger with the years. And it's actually interesting that the strengthening of relationships and the upgrading of relationships starts in 2010, at a period exactly when we are entering the crisis and the economic programs by George Papandreou. And in these 10 years of high polarization and of strong, politically charged atmosphere here in Greece, strengthening Greek-Israeli relationship was a bipartisan issue, and there weren't so many bipartisan issues throughout this period. So that shows that it's even more important. Just to go back to that period for a bit, 2014, which was the year that also Admiral Dιακόπουλος referred to, was not an easy year. It was the year of the Gaza war. And I remember very characteristically that at that time, Alexis Tsipras had made very clear statements about our position, the position of Syriza in relation to those events. And what was important at that point, and what became clear as time goes by, what was clear then also in 2014, was that Syriza would retain the position that it has and has today and had then about the importance of restarting the Middle East peace process, about a two-state solution on the basis of the borders of 1967, with East Jerusalem as the capital of the Palestinian state, living side by side peacefully with Israel, and have that position in parallel and unconnected to the importance that it attached to the strategic relations with Israel. And that was clear already from 2014. In 2015, after we got through the first 6 months that were full of tension, and the economic program and the negotiation was the focus of all political discussion, I remind you that Minister Kotsias made the trip at that time to Jerusalem, followed a few days later by Minister of Defense Kamenos. And Minister Kotsias highlighted at that time the framework in which the new Syriza government would be looking at Greek-Israeli relations. He said there is a triangle of instability in the broader region, Ukraine in the north, Libya to the west, and Syria and Iraq to the east. And Greece and Israel would be cooperating as a bilateral relationship promoting security and stability. And that has been the goal from the beginning. A few days later, Minister Kamenos visited, and the defense cooperation was also upgraded greatly. And the visits of then Prime Minister Tsipras in November to Jerusalem, and the first trilateral that was carried out in January of 2016, put a seal on what was to come, which was really an acceleration of relations, a strengthening of relations, at that time in a different environment than the one that exists today. But that was the signal that the relations would continue to be strengthened the whole period. We had 6 trilaterals after that. We had 2 high-level cooperation councils. What I want to underline is the multidimensional character of this cooperation. It was highlighted from the beginning, from the then Greek government, that our cooperation would be beneficial if exactly it was based on the alignment of our interests of 2 countries that were dynamic in the region, and that we had a lot to cooperate in, whether it was in energy, in LNG more broadly, in electrical energy with the Eurasia Interconnector project, and mostly with the East Med pipeline that became a flagship project and still is, as we saw a few months ago. And this is the basis on which we continued the cooperation, followed then by exchange of visits in the next 2 years that were to come by the 2 presidents. What I want to highlight also is the importance of on a cultural and a symbolic level, but on a deeply political level, that the anti-fascist message had at the time. You know very well that Golden Dawn was a strong force. Alexis Tsipras personally and Syriza gave the signal from the very beginning that it was important to highlight the struggle against anti-Semitism with his visit in November of 2015 to Yad Vashem, with holding on the day of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day event in the parliament. It coincided with our first trilateral. And then not long afterwards, with the opening of Thessaloniki Holocaust Museum that was greatly supported, and the highlighting of the importance of the Greek support to the Jewish community at different points during the Second World War. So I think that on a symbolic level, on a political level, gave also a great importance to what we were working on at the time. I think just to close, we can get more into the discussion about Turkey later. I think there are 3 levels on which we should look at this relationship and its future. First of all is the bilateral relationship. And I think definitely the basis was put in the last few years on many levels. I always like it when I hear ambassadors say that the future of the relationship is scientists of the Aristotle University working together with Israeli researchers. We have a future in science and technology. We have a future in economic cooperation that is untapped. And definitely from the beginning, the importance of a dynamic society and economy of Israel was recognized in 2015. The other part is how to broaden and keep this bilateral relationship and broaden it out in the region. It's a bilateral relationship on which we built the trilateral with Cyprus, the 3+1 with the United States, the Balkan opening with the participation of Prime Minister Netanyahu and events with other Balkan parties, the defense cooperation with other countries in the Eastern Mediterranean. We work on the gas forum together. So there are many levels that we are working on to broaden this cooperation. And the last is the kind of model that this constitutes for the region, the Greek-Israeli relationship. I think there we're going to see great opportunities, but challenges in the future. And for sure, then we will have to go back to the first discussion about this cooperation being a message, a cooperation of stability in an unstable region. There we need to keep the political will alive. It's clear that it's there to fuel the cooperation even more on a bilateral level and all the other levels I said. So that will be what its future will depend on. But also, there is no doubt to our mind either that the Greek-Israeli relationship will move ahead. Whether it will move ahead with small steps or big steps will be a result of our political will, the political will of the government and the two countries, but it will also be a result of the vision of the two countries in the region. It looks like we're going to go through difficult times ahead of us, difficult times in the region, and we need a Greece that will continue to be proactive in the region and be a pillar of security and stability. And for sure, we need an Israel that will have what the ambassador said, a vision not only for the EU and the region, but a vision for the security and stability of the region. We will see challenges to this shortly. As friends, we support Israel in many areas where we think its role is extremely important for our region. As friends, we have the honesty to speak where we disagree. Alexis Tsipras did that on his first visit then to Jerusalem, speaking about the Middle East peace process. Again, today we are called to express our criticism on the possible discussions for annexation. But whatever happens, I think that what has been unleashed in the last 10 years and the dynamic for the strategic cooperation is there and will continue to move ahead. How fast or how slow is in everyone's hands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kalpadakis. Now I want to go to the professor so that, Professor, you will take us many years back and explain to us how our two countries had deep ties, although maybe we didn't know it so well. Maybe we had forgotten it until recently, until 2010, until 1991. And I want us to get us back there, how it began, why we had so difficult relations for so many years, and why now we are in a very, very different path. And also, if Mr. Kalpazakis mentioned anti-Semitism, are you worried about anti-Semitism, not only in Greece, but the rise of it in Europe, in the states of the European Union?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to take part in this really anniversary, 30-year anniversary for full diplomatic relations between the two countries. The previous speakers mentioned correctly that, as a matter of fact, and we had something like 70 years of diplomatic relations. The first 50 years were not very happy years. Diplomatic relations were on a very low level. Then in 1990, we had the full recognition and full diplomatic relations and embassies. But really, it started in 2010. And people say that two things, as a matter of fact, produced this positive change in 2010. First of all, we had two prime ministers that shared an elite American university education, which is perfectly okay, but it's not enough. And then people say a crisis between Turkey and Israel. What I want to say that the relations, and it was mentioned before by the previous speakers, the relations have got much raison d'etre to have their own relations. That is to say, they have enough contents, and they have enough common denominators, and they have enough interests in order to have good relations between the countries, nothing to do with the refined education of our prime ministers or a crisis between Israel and the third country. This is one thing. But something happened as from 1990. Not only that diplomatic relations were elevated to full ambassadorial level, but as from 1990, the last 30 years, we had, or we still have, three aspects of Israeli interest in the East Mediterranean. It came out to energy. It came out, and it hasn't yet been mentioned here, to desalination of water done by Israel. As a matter of fact, something like 50% of our drinking water is now taken from the Mediterranean. something like 50% of our energy is now taken from the Mediterranean. And the third development was a real development in our military naval capacity in the Eastern Mediterranean. Why did I mention the third element? Because having energy in the East Mediterranean and meant also protection of this asset, something that also interests Cyprus, something that also interests Greece. So parallel to elevation of relations in 1990 to ambassadorial level, we had, from the point of view of Israel, three very important elements, as I've just said: drinking water, energy, and improvement, or even real dramatic, I would say, development in Israel Navy in the East Mediterranean. This is one thing. Another thing that I wanted to say in the short time that I've got, I mean, we have much in common. And something that I can mention here more than 3, 4, 5, 6 common denominators. I will limit myself to really 2. I want to say something that it is fair to say that in the 20th century, no other 2 peoples in the world were victimized more cruelly and suffered more profoundly, caught up in the grip of nationalism and the nation state, as the Greeks and the Israelis. I think that you can mention here the transfer of the 1920s, when something like 1.5 million Greeks had to leave Asia Minor. And you have the expulsion of Greeks from Egypt in 1957, 1958. And you had also the expulsion of Cypriots from the northern part of the island in 1974. And the list goes on. And of course, you have the Holocaust on the other hand. So really, I mean, you have 2 peoples that suffered a lot from the idea of nationalism, from the idea of the nation state, i.e. a nation state, that is to say a state for one nation that somehow cannot tolerate the existence by it of other ethnic groups. So we did have something that we relive it from time to time. We do remember these events, and we do our utmost that these events will not repeat themselves. May I mention something, one thing I believe that was mentioned here, but perhaps I will add a few words about it. Yes, Israel had special relations with various countries in the world. We had it with Iran, we had it with South Africa, we had it with Ethiopia. We also have had it with Turkey. The military element was probably the stronger part of these elements. Now, when the military element disappears, you can say that the special relations, as a matter of fact, also disappeared. Why do I mention this? Because if I say something for the future, and I was glad to hear that it's not only future, but already present events that happen already, that we should not limit our activity to military business. And I'm happy to say that you can, when you talk about energy, you talk about economic issues, when you talk about tourism, something like up to 2019, around 500,000, if I'm wrong, or something like 400,000 Israelis have visited or visited Greece and enjoyed the tourism asset of Greece. So there is a lot to develop in the relations, mainly in the economic issue, in the trade issue, in energy issue, and in some other elements as well, and not limit ourselves to the military aspects in the East Mediterranean. I want, to add one thing concerning relations in the past, something that also bears impacts to the present. This is relation with the Greek Patriarchate in Jerusalem. The Greek Orthodox Patriarchate in Jerusalem and the State of Israel developed quite close relations as from the early 1950s. Then the catalyst, how they call it, the thing that produced these special relations was that both bodies, the Orthodox Church on one hand and the State of Israel, on the other hand, they objected to the attempts of the Vatican to make the holy places in Jerusalem an international place, nothing to have with Israel or nothing to have with the West Bank or something like this. And the Greek Orthodox Church saw it as an attempt by the Vatican to limit the impact and the influence of the Greek Orthodox Church. As from that moment onwards, as from the late 1940s, beginning of the 1950s, you could see that there is close relations between the Greek Patriarchate in Jerusalem and the State of Israel, close relations that last up to nowadays. This brings us to something which is quite sad, what happens now in the Middle East concerning the existence of Christian communities in the Middle East, something that bears direct relations also, or direct reference or direct influence on the Greek Orthodox Church here in the Middle East. We live in an area that in particular after the Arab Spring and the civil wars that the Arab Spring produced, you can see that Christians, as a matter of fact, emigrate from the Middle East. That is to say, Christian communities and ethnic group and the existence of Christian ethnic groups in the Middle East was almost disappeared. It happened in Iraq, it happened in Syria, it happens nowadays in Lebanon, it happens to the Copts in Egypt. That is to say, you see that Christianity in the Middle East suffers a lot during the last 10 or even 20 years. This is something that bears direct relations also to the Greek state and also to the Greek Orthodox Church. And if I may say something about what, by this, perhaps I will sum up my introduction. If you take something like luckily, we managed to have 3+1. It has been mentioned before, but I want to have something to add about it. You have good group now, which is a tripartite group, and this tripartite group has already produced 6, if not more, summit meeting between heads of state, not something that did not exist before. And if you count it, something like the last decade, you already had something like six meetings between heads of state. It includes Cyprus, it includes Greece, and obviously includes Israel as well. And now you have also the American blessing to this tripartite cooperation. And if you have here 3+1, and I wouldn't underrate this, not that anybody else does it, but I would say something, although America seems to leave the Middle East, America does give its blessings to the cooperation between Cyprus, Greece, and Israel. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to get back to you, Mr. Ambassador, we see that there is a very dangerous competition for influence in the region. Do you believe, we heard the professor, that we have to cooperate between Israel and Greece, and not only in the military, regarding the military, but do you believe that we have to take quicker steps in regarding the military cooperation between Israel and Greece, if we see how the situation in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean is evolving with Syria, with Turkey, with Russia?
I'd like to comment on a few of the remarks, the interventions before, and I fully adhere with the message of my dear friend, Mr. Kalpadakis, the need to develop a rationale for the relationship, the need to invest, important to move in small steps towards a certain horizon, certain strategic horizon. And the relationship between Greece and Israel, though kind of late bloomers in a way, reflect the geostrategic realities in this region. We should not dwell too much on the anomaly of the first 50 years. We should invest in the next 50 years into a leadership mission assignment on where we take the relationship for the future, the national strengths of both Israel and Greece. And I do believe that we can complement each other's efforts. the basis of the relationship, with all due respect to any forum and any formalities of relationship, is the 1+1, the bilateral relationship. The bilateral relationship, those are the two pillars which on this foundation, like the silver tray of Alterman on a different connection, was built the trilateral cooperation with Cyprus. This plus the other Greek triangles in the region, with Egypt, with other countries, taking or having in mind the model of the EMGF, the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, can be a multilateral strategy to build different relationships in the region. Together, we can reach other countries without excluding or without aiming to exclude anyone. The foundation of the relationship, I would emphasize it again and again, is Israel and Greece, and on Israel and Greece, we can build further cooperation. The other element which I would like to refer to is the small steps compared or vis-a-vis the big steps. Small steps come together to a big march. I'm quoting this Chinese saying, but it started with small things in the past, and right now we are on the verge of engaging in what may end up as a strategic coordination aiming at strengthening the national strengths of both countries. You have your interest, we have our interest, but through cooperation, through coordination, keeping in mind certain differences on certain issues and certain disagreements, we can develop the relationship. And this is exactly what has happened under Prime Minister Tsipras. We need to move in major leaps towards the future. The military relationship between the two countries are of importance to Israel. They are important for Greece. If it serves as a deterrence to someone, this is a byproduct. But I would not focus the relationship on either the elephant in the room or, for that matter, one country in the region. The relationship are independent of one country or another country. The relationship are not just based on military cooperation. Military cooperation, its wider aspect of strategic cooperation, is only one dimension of the relationship. There are so many other dimensions: investment, trade, scientific cooperation, Europe 2027, tourism. Now Greece is facing a major economic challenge. First target of tourism after the lockdown of the corona would be Israeli tourists. There is such an expectation of Israelis to come to Greece, and there is such a welcoming here to have Israeli tourists to help the economy. So there is economic cooperation. There is people-to-people relationship. As important as the military foundations, it's a foundation. We build on this cooperation towards the future. And let's not limit military cooperation to military drills or to military know-how. There is military industry, there is procurement, but the most important thing is how we serve through diplomacy national strengths. Israel national strengths depends, as far as I can judge, as a veteran of 38 years of Israeli diplomacy, through coalition, partnership, hybrid alliances with different countries. This is stronger than any military weapon, with all due respect to missiles and whatever else. And I do believe that this can help Greece as well in empowering Greece's position and influence within the European Union. You are a European country. You are one of the pillars of the EU. And I do hope, and we see changes, to hear a more clear Greek voice in regional issues in EU deliberations.
Mr. Dιακόπουλος, you heard the ambassador, and I wanted to ask you, the government is going to take small or bigger steps towards deepening the relationship between Greece and Israel in the next few years?
It doesn't mind if there are small or big steps. If I have to ask, I would say big, but the thing is that the steps are forward and not backwards. So what I can assure you is that any step, small or big, will be forward towards enhancing and strengthening and widening this cooperation. Now, of course, this cooperation started militarily, as it was been said previously, which makes some sense. The military guys are like that. They get a political guidance and then they implement. So it's easy to start from here. What is difficult is to go to another dimension, to pass to a different phase. And I think that we have already achieved that. The military, strictly military cooperation program became a defense cooperation. And the defense cooperation now is becoming strategic cooperation, which entails much more things than just to have military drills or all that stuff. What the ambassador, His Excellency, said, yes, we would like to have more cooperation in armament procurement. We already had now we have these UAVs, Heron UAVs, leased from Israel and Greece. So you see that it's getting more and more traction, this cooperation. And I would love to see they have some excellent companies. I mean, indicatively, I would say, I mean, like Elbit or Rafael or Plasan. I would like to see their companies to come and invest in the defense sector, defense technology in Greece. That will help and enhance even more our cooperation. But for sure, the military or defense domain is just one small part. The civil society, the economy, the scientific sector, tourism, everything, they are components of a whole. And the whole is a strategic relation that becomes bigger and stronger by the time. Of course, in any relation, when it's a true relation, there are disagreements. We know that from personal experience, you know. But even the disagreements cannot deter and cannot stop this march towards, with small or big steps, this march toward stronger and deeper relations.
Are you talking now about the Palestinian Authority issue? And because we know what is happening, and we know what the European Union, the stance that they are taking. Are you talking about that? Because and Mr. Kalpazakis referred to the Palestinian issue.
Yes, up to a point I was referring to that, but not only that. The ambassador, His Excellency, talked about the Greece voice in the European Union. Greece has many times voiced the voice of Israel, or of a country which is friend of Israel in the European Union, and we're going to do so. But of course, there are principles and limits and sometimes disagreements. That doesn't say that we're not friends or we're not going to cooperate or we're not going to support Israel. It says that we support Israel, but in a very certain specific framework of our being a part of the European Union. And this comes with some obligations toward the Union. What we didn't say before is that Greece is also representing Israel in NATO. So what is, again, very natural is to have Greece to be the representative, the link of Israel towards the Europe and the West in general.
Mr. Kalpazakis, if I asked you why, are you worried about something for the future relations between Greece and Israel, what would you say? You have a long experience. You were next to Alexis Tsipras in all these years. You know very well Israel, Greece, and how our relationship works. So are you worried about something, or are you sure that now we are going on the right path between the two countries? I don't know if Mr. Kalpazakis can hear me, or if we have some problem in the line. Okay, he doesn't hear us, we have a problem, so we will go, I will go back to Professor. Professor, you talked earlier about...
I can hear you.
You can hear us. Okay, Mr. Kalpazakis. Can you answer us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Did you? Yes, did you hear my question?
Yes, I did. I said I am both hopeful and worried. I am hopeful because, as was described, there is great potential for Israel.
We have again a problem. Yes, we have a problem with Mr. Kalpazakis. We have to fix the problem, because maybe it's your Wi-Fi, and we'll go back to you. And now, Professor, you said about Christianity in the Middle East and how we see Christians disappearing. You said what is happening in Egypt, what is happening in Iraq, in Syria. Are you worried also about, I asked you before, but you talked more about Greece and Israel. Are you also worried about anti-Semitism in Europe? Are you worried that the past is coming back to us? Because we see what's happening also in Germany, we see what is happening in France. We've seen polls that say that people, 43% I think in France, they are not worried when the French Jews are being attacked. Are you worried?
May I say something that, in my opinion, anti-Semitism says something about what happened in the societies, in the countries where anti-Semitism raises its head. If you go to the 1930s, if you go to nowadays, you could see it very well. The moment that you have social problems, the moment that people are dissatisfied, that moment people are unemployed or frustrated or whatever, immediately you have almost a Pavlovian reaction is to have anti-Semitic reactions. So it says a lot about societies in various countries where you see this phenomenon of anti-Semitism. It has never disappeared. It from time to time raises its head, and obviously it is very worrisome. Obviously it is something that to be dealt with and not to expect it to disappear. And hopefully this present wave of anti-Semitism in various countries that you've just mentioned will at least will go lower and become softer, and not the reflections that we see or the expressions of anti-Semitism that we see now.
Okay, thank you very much. And I go back to you, Mr. Kalpadakis. Do you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, we can. Now perfect.
Thank you. So just to answer your question, I am both hopeful and worried. I mean, I'm hopeful because, as we all said today, there is a great range of areas in which we can work. I agree fully with the ambassador that our basis should be one-to-one. I mean, the Greek-Israeli relations is a very important one for many other relationships in the region, not all, but many other. And there's a lot of potential in that relationship. And particularly as we come out of the pandemic, we should be able to mobilize around that and become a very dynamic partnership. I'm worried, coming back to what I said about steps, because I believe small steps will be for sure happening. Those steps will be and should be ahead. But to be able to make even more important steps and more strategically important steps, we need a vision for the region. And as the ambassador said, our strength, and I say this also as a diplomat, is in the hybrid alliances that we create in the region. That is the strength of Greece, that is the strength of Israel. But these alliances need a vision, and our vision, the vision of Greece, the vision of Israel for the region, will be tested in the next period. For sure, for Greece, we need to keep our vision as what was said, a European pillar of stability and security in the region, a proactive force in the region. And also for Israel, what we need is this vision for security and stability. This was what we were able to work on in the past years. And the politicians need to be able to help us to create this breathing space so that we can take bigger steps, not just the small steps that we will take and that are important for their own. So in the next period, I think we should all be watching very attentively the decisions that will be taken, because they will be very important for the future of the region and for peace for all the peoples around the Mediterranean.
Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Kalpadakis talks about the vision of the region. What would be your vision in the region? We cannot hear you, Mr. Ambassador. I don't know if your microphone is on.
You are right, my microphone was on mute.
Of course,
this helped me rethink my comment or my reaction. I'm not the only diplomat here, but I'm the only serving diplomat. My comments and my thoughts on the issue of the vision of the relationship are part of my daily job and my daily communication with my headquarters. I fully sympathize with the message of my friend Kalpadakis, Mr. Kalpadakis. It depends on leadership. It depends on an honest exchange of views. I do hope that soon we will have an opportunity for the heads of states or the heads of governments to meet head to head, eye to eye, and exchange views on the future of relationship. As an observer of the region, as an observer of Israeli foreign policy, I believe in the alliance between our two countries. I do believe that this alliance is for the better interest of the wider region. And I once again emphasize that the relationship should stand on their own. The relationship are based on the map. Just look at the map and realize the benefit we can derive from cooperating. We need a strategy. We need a vision. We need leadership for the relationship, which will connect our economies, will connect our infrastructure. I don't want our relationship to be hostage of one item, either military, energy, EastMed, or anything else. I do see Greece as a bridge for Israel, bridge towards Europe in improving our relationship, our political relationship with Europe. You can play a very important role in achieving that goal, and you can play a very instrumental role in opening doors in the Middle East. The future of Israel, the place of Israel, it's in the Middle East. We need to overcome political handicaps, to overcome political obstacles, and to create parallel infrastructure for cooperation, not only military, not only intelligence, but civilian. It's energy, it's environment, it's protection of the sea, it's infrastructure. Professor Nachmani mentioned the desalination. Israel has become a regional water powerhouse with zero water resources. Zero is exaggeration, but very limited water resources. We now desalinated more water than we have. I would share with you a thought that I tried to promote when I was head of policy planning of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Infrastructure is a bridge for regional cooperation. Energy, electricity, water. I do think that by generosity, cooperation with our partners, we can overcome political obstacles. Reaching a final comprehensive solution to the Israeli-Palestinian issue would take time. I'm not sure that the conditions at the moment or anytime soon are right for that. But short of this, we can create a different environment where peace, the true meaning of economic peace, is cooperation. Israel is a leading country in the region. Generosity, help to the other. This is in line with the values we believe in. That's my vision, but I'm not here on a role or on a payroll of a visionary, but a practitioner of foreign policy.
Are you worried now, Mr. Ambassador? I cannot but ask you that question. Are you worried now that Mahmoud Abbas said that they will break all agreements that they had with Israel and the United States? Are you worried we are in the middle of the pandemic? The Palestinian Authority is taking that decision after you decided for the annexation of the West Bank and where the people, your people live, and are you aware that that would create once more chaos in the region? And as a matter of fact, in a time that we have also the open issue of Syria, we see what is happening in Libya with Iran. Are you worried that that decision that you took now, maybe it was not of the best of interest for the whole region?
We gathered here to discuss Israeli-Greek relationship and the regional situation. Discussing Palestinian policies or the Palestinians' current situation vis-a-vis recent regional development should require a different webinar, and I'm very happy to participate in such a webinar. For me, to answer your question shortly, if I say that I'm not concerned would be politically, diplomatically incorrect. To say that I'm concerned would be a certain failure to understand the role of Palestinians to follow their pattern of behavior since many years, I would say. Let me be blunt and say that there is no vacuum anywhere. And the Palestinians resort to all tactics of breaking connections and not coming to the negotiating table, having their preconditions. This is the case since 2009. Maybe this is the case before 2009. Before 2009, we had Annapolis, and there was a very far-reaching compromise. Some say it's the most far-reaching ever. Prime Minister then, Mr. Olmert, presented it to Mr. Abu Mazen. They met a few months ago in New York, but Mr. Abu Mazen has not answered yet, though Mr. Olmert is not in office anymore. And before that, we had Camp David, July 2000 in the US, when Mr. Arafat was offered by the Americans, by the Israelis, something which, according to American sources whom I know personally, was very far-reaching and very generous. The question the Palestinians would have to answer at the end of the day is whether this strategy of not engaging is helping their cause or not. What happened in the last 20 years? What happened in the last 20 years, Israel is a more powerful, economically, with or without Corona. Strategically, we are the strongest ever. The relationship Israel has in the region are beyond diplomacy. And much has to do with regional developments. The concern of many countries in the region is not like the diatribe of the rhetorics of the 60s or the 50s or the 70s about the legitimate rights of the Palestinians. And I'm one who believes in two-state solution. I would dare and say that as a diplomat, the region is less concerned of the Palestinians and more concerned of, let me put it this, peripheral, out of the region powers with interest in the region itself. And that's the key change since 2009.
Thank you very much. I don't know if any of you, because we have reached our time limit, wants to add anything. Mr. Kalpadakis, Mr. Dιακόπουλος, Professor.
Yes, I would.
Please, go ahead, go ahead.
No, Professor, please.
Go ahead, please.
Be my guest. I will be extremely brief to say that I agree more or less with what was said before by His Excellency. I want to say that, yes, Israel is a stability provider and not a stability consumer. And the same applies to Greece. In an area which is plagued by instability, by civil strife, by war by proxy, by everything, Greece and Israel are two countries that provide stability and cooperation. And I think these tripartite schemes that Greece has, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, etc., are the only game in town, the only schemes that provide stability in an otherwise very unstable region. And this is a good basis for more cooperation between us. Thank you very much.
Professor.
Yes, just to mention one point that probably make me a bit optimistic. And the fact is we are roughly the same size. That is to say approximately 10 million people in each country, more or less. And, you know, both countries have experienced during the past and even the recent past intervention on behalf of stronger actors, much stronger militarily and economically and probably commercially, etc., etc. Sometimes these actors even inferiorized us or even patronized us. And, you know, probably it is for us, the 10 million people on both sides, is to cooperate between us and not, which probably will produce much better fruits than being from time to time having to reject and to deny any intervention on behalf of stronger elements that would like to, as I've just said, to inferiorize us. So I'm optimistic.
If I may say something too.
Yes, Mr. Kalpazakis, and we will close with the ambassador.
I think the ambassador, His Excellency, has vast experience with these issues and is very perceptive, and he referred to important strategic realities in the region. But I will agree with him that we need to have a separate webinar to speak seriously about the issues that have to do with the latest decisions, the instability they create, the potential for stability in the region. I think we do need a separate webinar for that, just that. But
well,
for the moment,
is listening to what you are telling us, and you and Mr. Ambassador.
If I may suggest, such a discussion should be with the Palestinian representative. They are part of the discussion. They should not be out of it. So it would be nice to engage in such a discussion.
Absolutely.
You are right, Mr. Ambassador.
But just to close for the moment, I think it's important to underline the importance of our 30 years of diplomatic relations, because this is a very important partnership for the region. And I think there was a lot said to underline how important it is.
Mr. Ambassador, I want for you to have the last words in this discussion that we had. And I take it from here because I heard you saying that when you walk in Athens, when you travel in Greece, you see how the people speak to you, how they feel about the Greek-Israeli relationships. And I wanted for us, when we close this discussion, to talk about that. How is you feeling 8 months now in Greece, when after 30 years, our relations are getting much, much better? I don't know, is your microphone on?
Thank you for reminding me again. I would admit that becoming an ambassador to the Hellenic Republic, ambassador of Israel in Greece, Athens, has been a dream of mine. And I am a student of history. I studied classical history, Greek history, and I admired the culture and the contribution of this country to our civilization. Being a guest in this country during the Corona crisis, I learned to admire the resilience and the discipline and the care of the Greek people. There are many things which fascinate me in your country. I do believe that Greece public opinion are an example of public activity and engagement. I know that some of the people, Alex, for example, is always shocked with me being impressed with the protests and the demonstrations on the street. I do think that you are a beacon of democracy, and we Israelis can learn much from you. I enjoy my stay here. I look forward to explore more. Must tell you that sometimes I wake up with certain song in my head, and then I check the song and I realize that it's a Hebrew translation to Hagidakis. You can't even imagine how close the relationship are. Some of the best songs in Hebrew are translations of Nomi Shemer and others to Hagidakis poetry. So I just woke up a week ago, very happy, and I was kind of singing a Chava Alberstein, Israeli singer song, and I tried to check the words. And then I was shocked, it's Hagidakis. So for some reason, Greece is part of who I am, and I like it very much. And I do hope that my term here would help in taking the relationship a step, if not more, further. I think that we are in the right direction. And I'm very happy with the outcome, or with the spirit of the conference call, video conference call of the two prime ministers. I'm not at liberty to get into details, but I think now that we enjoyed some political stability back at home, we will focus on the true important things and how safeguarding our democracies in our country. So thank you very much for hosting this event, and thank you all for participating. Whether we agree or disagree on certain things, we believe in the relationship, and that's the important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Dιακόπουλος, Professor, Mr. Kalpadaakis, for being here with us and discussing the 30 years of good relations between Greece and Israel. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.